Hello, world. Today we're talking to Emiliano Villarreal. Emiliano calls himself a product Yoda, and I think that's just the best description ever because throughout our conversation, he was dropping pearls of product wisdom that had me feeling like a Padawan. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Emiliano, thank you so much for joining us today. You've had an absolutely amazing career working across so many industries and with so many people. Can you kind of give us the highlight reel of your career journey so far?
Yeah, I love that intro. It makes me feel special. So I would say I label myself as a creative creature. I've been able to jump through a lot of different areas, and I've been fortunate either to be the founder or employee number one of seven different companies, and then from that have also done a lot of advising and teaching design over at the Austin Center for Design. And so I feel like I've gotten to wear a lot of hats, gain a lot of scar tissue, and then also now kind of see myself oscillating sometimes between kind of being like a product Rambo and coming in and helping take an idea and finding the first paying customers, or really helping companies figure out their kind of engines of growth. It's also being kind of like a product Yoda and helping teams or people just kind of like level up their philosophies. At heart, I've always been with like smaller startup companies. I went to UT. I did the Texas Creative Sequence, which was really focused on coming up with the ideas for advertisements and things of those sorts. And I graduated and I was like, F this. I hate this. Advertising is very hollow, very artificial. Um, and so I was very fortunate to jump in and work with a buddy from college who had started a business while he was still a student. And so I was employee number one. And this was in kind of like the physical manufacturing space. It was great because it gave me an immersion into just seeing everything that it took to take a high growing business and really continue to scale it and be successful. And so I went from originally coming in to be doing a lot of like the marketing and like the e-commerce website design to just having my hands in everything from logistics and order fulfillment to doing sales. And that was really pivotal because I think it helped me just see all the work that it entails to have a successful and a growing business. I did that for 3 years and then I wanted to go off and start my own design agency. And so I went down to Mexico, did freelance design, found out that I hated it. I did it for about a year and very quickly realized that even though I loved the work that I was doing, I really disliked trying to juggle multiple clients and multiple deliverables. And I had no desire to kind of scale the business that much. And so I would have clients that would want me to go off and design something new. And this was like print, this was back in the day. And I couldn't tell them like, oh, like I'm really busy right now. Can I do this work for you in like a month? Long story long, I did that. I came back to the States. I worked with my friend's company again. And then I realized that I saw just very much how being in a company that had inventory and was so much based around like the physical movement of goods, how that couldn't scale. And so that's when I decided to make the transition into companies that were digital because you weren't constrained. If you wanted to increase 10 times the amount of sales, you didn't have to hire 10 times the amount of like engineers or product people. I started getting into kind of like the tech startup space.
No, that's amazing. I love your labels. I think that's like product Yoda is such a fun label and something that's so needed. Like so many teens, at least that we work with, are like they could use a Yoda. So that I love that. You were sort of touching it on the end there a little bit. I'd love to dig in. What moment did you realize that technology was going to be really important for you, but and also for your career?
That's a great question. I think I've always gravitated towards tools as things that are empowering and giving me the ability to express myself or to manifest ideas that are in my head. And so I think one of like the first tools, um, a little different than like actual software, was like Adobe Photoshop. That was a tool that was a real game changer for me because I'm pencil challenged. Like if you were asking me to go off and to draw something, it would look very childlike, and not because I wanted to. It was just like where my skills were at. And so Photoshop became a tool that let me start to do design and explore graphic design in a way that just like my own native skills wouldn't allow for. And so I've just always been very aware how developing skills lead towards empowerment and the facilitation of being able to express ideas, whether they're in a professional setting, whether it's in a creative pursuit for myself, and always being fascinated with like having that power at my fingertips. And then as I have tried to do larger endeavors, you come into that adage of like needing to do it in a team if you want to be able to go far. And so tackling things that are doing products that were more sophisticated or larger always meant collaborating with other people. And that's where we start getting into kind of how, my personal point of view is that like a product team and an engineering team really need to be married at the hip, and their coordination and their ability to work together really dictates kind of like the gait and the velocity of how quickly a venture can continue um, to grow and to even just kind of do that pivoting and course correction.
Absolutely. I feel like you've seen just so many different teams and how they operate and function together. When you
Mhm.
have that product team and that engineering team, what are like some common like pitfalls that you see where like they just, things aren't working or like it's, misalignment, all that stuff. Like what's out there in the world right now?
I mean, I think the classic one that you still see is just silos, right? It's like the one team does the body of work and then they throw it over the wall and someone else catches with it. And I think the problem of that is that it's the wrong measurement of what it means to actually deliver a feature or deliver functionality. Um, and so that's where for me like the ability to always work with cross-functional teams, that everyone gets a seat at the table from the beginning of the inception of like a feature or functionality to the actual, well, let's go off and we've released this, let's take a look at how users are actually using this. So I think that's still to me the most common pitfall, is how so many times we have product and engineering teams that are focused on the deliverable of velocity without actually acting as well. Did it satisfy? Like, did the functionality that we put out, did it meet the user's need and did it meet the business needs? Right, and we've verified that rather than just being happy that sprint number 22 was completed on time and all these tickets went away.
Yeah, we feel that very acutely, I think, as as an agency, right? It's like tell us the work you've done. And so a lot of our job is really like, well, actually, was this work valuable? Did we actually move any needles? Did we make anyone's life better? Did we deliver more value? And that's like, especially like with first time founders or people who are new to product, that's such a mental shift that it just takes a lot of work and a lot of coaching. Do you have any like practices or rituals you like to work with that kind of help broaden people's horizons, start thinking that way?
I think what I think about is, um, because I do a lot of advising and a lot of coaching now, um, I'm typically not an expert in the domain space or like what the functionality is supposed to do or what the feature is trying to help someone accomplish. And so I very quickly had to stop relying on my personal opinions of what I thought was good or bad or intuitive or successful, and really start to figure out, how can I construct some kind of experiment in some kind of rapid fashion that will collect the data to then give the signals to the team, that this is heading in the right direction. Unfortunately, it's still not common practice. Most feedback comes too late in the process when you've already made commitments and decisions. And so, when you wait until that till the end of that, it just means that there's a really strong possibility that there's going to be a lot of rework, and depending on how much investment has been put into it, could also actually be where the company runs out of funding. So that's, I think, what I've tried to focus more on now is trying to figure out how can I gently surface the assumptions that are being made and what's a really simple test, even if it's as little as talking with one person, to then start to show data, that will then help us either feel confident about what we're doing or potentially raise a red flag that, hey, you know what, we did a verbal pitch to someone about what like this feature should do, or we showed the wireframes to someone, and they were confused by them, or they said, hey, that's not really that important, I wish you solved this thing instead. Maybe we should go talk to 5 more customers before we spend 2 weeks of the full engineering team developing this.
I love that. I love that approach. I think there's a lot of people are afraid of showing work in progress, even on, like in a team, right?
Yeah.
Um, like how does that resonate with your experience?
It is, and it's. I mean, I think that it's always like no one wants to find out that their baby's ugly, right? And so I think that was one of the great things that I developed from the creative program that I did at UT is you had to pin up your work on the wall every single week, and you would have your ideas just bashed. I mean, there was no holding back on either it was a good idea or someone had already done it, and so you start to develop a thick skin, but you also then start to crave that feedback. And I think, unfortunately, with a lot of creative endeavors, it is a reflection of you are putting yourself into your work, and no one wants to hear that it's like poor or that it's not valuable. So you have to develop that kind of like mental fortitude of that the feedback is really going to help you, even if in the short term it might cause some angst or it might hurt your ego a little bit. And I've built enough things and run enough experiments to realize that, like, no matter how much I try, I cannot predict, I cannot guarantee. I've done things where even on when I worked with Ash Moria from Lean Canvas and we were doing a redesign of our landing page, I went off and I took the designs and I talked to like 4 of my friends that were some of the brightest product people and growth engineers that I knew, and they all thought that the page would be better. And then I ran an A/B test, and it performed worse than the page that we had, which, in my opinion, was not like very clear and like had some really outdated graphics, but it had a better conversion. And as a founder, I would rather take an ugly page that performs a lot better than a polished page that is suboptimal. And so I think just through like the hard knocks of that, I've really just developed that belief of the importance of testing always and testing early in the process.
Yeah, I love that you bring up hard knocks because it does feel like you need to feel that pain of failure of like I've shipped something and nobody came for it and nobody
Yep.
wanted it and nobody, couldn't get any traction before you can start saying like, all right, I got to put my ego over here
Yep.
and focus on like delivering something that people actually want as opposed to something that makes me feel good about myself.
Yeah. Ash Moria always said, like, you don't appreciate waste until you've been wasteful. Right. And so, like, we can
Mhm.
all chuckle about that, but that's unfortunately sometimes where you learn those expensive lessons. I
Mhm.
think the flip side of once you really embrace testing and join things early is that it's very freeing because it becomes, again, less about you having to have the perfect opinion or the right set of information from the beginning, and then really believing in kind of the iterative process. And so I know a lot of times there are things where I can be working on a feature and it, like, I know it feels incomplete. I know it's not at like the best and final form, but I will still go off and start to test it or pilot it with someone else, because I will come out more informed and a better position to know what things really need tweaking versus the subjective opinion I have. And so that to me, a lot of times is liberating because I just need to have enough. I don't need to have the full thing. If I can get to that point where I can get feedback, then the rest of the process really will make sure that it gets sculpted to the final form that it needs to be at.
Absolutely. There's one thing I've noticed is that sometimes you work with teams that they sort of have this mentality already. They're experienced product practitioners and they want to experiment and that's how they want to build versus the team that's like a brand new founder. They've sort of read a few blog posts and books and they
Yep.
kind of think it's very linear. And it's almost like they just get caught in this trap of velocity and shipping and moving forward. Is it possible to course correct them and kind of say like, okay, let's expose you to some different ways of doing things and kind of change the product practice? Or do you kind of need to start with like good first principles and go from there? How has that kind of been?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what it comes down to a lot of times is like humility. And you have kind of this strange case with a lot of founders or first time entrepreneurs, which is um, they are making a huge bet on themselves, right? Even if it's not financially, they just have to have this level of belief that the world or that users need the solution that they're offering, and you do need to have a kind of stubbornness and a resiliency to kind of take that leap. Um, And so I think that's where, again, it's the having talked with entrepreneurs, thousands of them across the world, you can very quickly gauge how quickly someone is open to having their idea or their startup question. And I think from there, depending on the relationship that I have with them, is where I will start to adjust. But the good thing is, most people. I was gonna say good, but I was just thinking of like, I've met entrepreneurs who spend like $120,000 to build an app, and it failed. Right? And so going back to that quote of like, you don't appreciate waste until you've been wasteful. I think you have to try to find a point that allows for there to be uncertainty in a way that we can start to question it or say like, hey, what type of signal do we want to get? So hey, you have this idea, you want to get to a $5 million annual revenue with it. Let's do a little back of the envelope calculations. You make $100 per customer. Okay, so we need to go off and we need to get $50,000, 50,000 customers, and start to work backwards from that, getting down to, okay, well, how could we go do a test with 5 people? Like, how do we go off and test that with 50 people? Let's test, like, do you know 5 people that you think would be interested in this? How do we go off and then conduct some kind of experiment, and see what kind of signal we get from them?
Yeah, I love that idea of like 10xing, like every, like how many people can we solve, immediately, and then like orders of operations, and kind of on that theme, like we've been talking a lot about like founders and like the initial idea, but when you're on a product team that maybe is a little bit more established and you've got some validation and some traction, like how does that collaboration dynamic change? Like what has that been like?
Yeah, I'm thinking through of actual like real companies that I've worked with. The way that I sometimes frame that for myself is I think of how many degrees of separation when I do testing. I will almost always go test first with someone else in the team. So I call that like hallway testing, right? I would rather go test with someone who's on sales, customer support, someone who's on like the product side, documentation, whatever, like anyone who has like some understanding of the customer. And even if they don't know the customer, there's a lot of like the UX stuff. There's always a lot of usability issues that you can figure out. And then from there, if that testing proves to go well and we do our iteration, and from there I do the next degree, which is how do I start to test this with like a warm user, like someone who I have a good relationship with or who has opted in to giving feedback. And again, that's usually limited, 5 to 10 people. And then from there, we might extend it to how do we start to do like a beta or an alpha where we've invited people. And then the final thing is like the public. So it almost goes from like the arm reach of someone who I know and trust to someone who like I have a little bit of, I've had conversations with, to then someone who could be a complete stranger. And so sometimes the testing starts with a safer space before it goes out to the outward space. And that, again, going back to your question of how do we get people to open up to testing or changing behaviors, it's just lowering the risk or making it more palatable.
That's such a good framing, because I think it does feel risky, right? Like if you're a founder or even like a division head, right? And you're like, we're building this thing, it's in stealth and it's going to change the world. And if we start showing it to people, like the secret's going to get out, right? I think that's the common fear. So I love that idea of like, well, we can increment this, we can roll it out in a way that works for us. And on those larger teams, I think developer time can be like such a finite resource.
Mm-hmm.
We only have so many people who can build the thing. How has your kind of technical background enabled your teams to do more with less?
Yeah. Yeah. 100% on that. I mean, I think you start to look at constraints and resources, and you understand, whether you're at a startup and you only get a few bets and you have to be really judicious with where you are putting that time and money. Or if you start being with a larger organization and you start to see the cost of change and maintenance, I think that's one of the challenges for a lot of designers and product people in their early career is the challenges that you have at a company that's like 6 months old or a 1 year old versus a company that's been around for like 5 or 6 years, and like the breadth and the portfolio of the product, like overhead and maintenance is its own challenge. And so the thing that has really I think helped me build a bond and good rapport with engineering side is the fact that I can code. So when I worked with Ash, I was essentially doing all the product side of things and doing all the wireframes and the high fidelity mockups, and it became very apparent that I could design much faster than we could code, and I wasn't just trying to go off and like build screens to have them sit there. I really wanted to get the features out because I was having constant conversations with all of our users. And so I started learning how to do Ruby on Rails um, and do some of the more front end coding and starting to. I mean, I remember even asking Ash once of like, and this is dating myself, of like, how do I float a text to get it on the right side, and like struggling with that. Um, and so, you know, being someone who can code not only helps me have a more technical understanding of what is easy, what are limitations, how do things operate, um, which then informs like the design decisions that I make, to then actually also understanding kind of what it's like to be working as a developer and having empathy. And this is again where like if you really think about the product team and the engineering team being married at the hip, I don't think it's just actually around the velocity and the workflow, but it's like the bond that you have between them. And so this is where the reason that I want a developer to sit in on a usability test or like on a research conversation with the client is because they're going to go from it being a Jira ticket to it being like, oh, this person's name is Maria Angela, right? And she has a child and her husband's an architect. And like we learn all these things that transform it from it being just kind of like an imaginary persona or a body of work to thinking about like, how could this actually go off and help someone in their real life? And so similar to that experience, uh, me being someone who has tried to ship lines of code, ship functionality, struggled with bugs or errors, things that I've introduced into the system, all of that makes me a lot more empathetic of what it's like to be a developer and like what the work looks like, which then also helps me, I think, have a better working relationship and be kinder towards what their needs are. So one of the big, well, I'll stop there.
No, no, I was loving it, and now I'm been nerd psyched by floats because I remember those days. That was a hard hard world to live in back then. Um, uh, One thing that goodness, I've lost my train of thought here because I was just absorbing that awesome story. Um,
Too much stuff.
it's good stuff though. It's good stuff. So I liked what you were saying about like empathy and kindness and building that like that bridge and that understanding because I remember early in my career as a junior designer stepping out and it was like literally the developers were in the basement and they were like so separated from us and like the work we were doing. And it took a lot of effort to just go in there and be like, hey, like, what are y'all working on? And can you show me? And can I sit with you
Yeah.
and watch? But it shapes like so much understanding. And
Mhm.
I think that what gets lost sometimes, especially in like maybe more online or boot camp sort of design education, is like code is the medium, right, for all these digital products. And it feels like people are being ever more removed and abstracted, especially with AI coming out from what the code is doing and what's happening. Um, is that something I know you're teaching a lot of design students these days? Are you seeing that as well, or is that something where people are still making the effort to understand what's going on with code?
I think I, I'm not sure from like a teaching standpoint because I think a lot of what I've taught at the Austin Center for Design is more focused on the still like the user centered portion of it, which is actually independent of um, is this an app? Is this is this a native app? Is this a web app? Is this a service? Is like what's like the real human need? Like how do we go off and actually understand? I've told you like know what our customers smell like have a real intimate knowledge of the user and their goals and like what their day is full of and what motivates them and what things are they staying awake at night worrying about. Um, so but I think with the AI component, on one side, I feel like this is still like a pressure of. I don't know if you felt this before. I felt like um, there had been this this push to have designers become unicorns, right? To be able to be like product managers, to be able to do visual design, to be able to do UX, to be able to do research, to be able to like go off and implement and code all of these things. And so um, the people that I know, like you, who are like really strong product engineers, are so valuable. And I think AI is magnifying that, where it's making it so that you can do more with a smaller team. But I think it still comes back to, just because you can build things doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be successful, right? Like the still of getting getting faster at producing functionality doesn't guarantee success unless you are still actually being methodical in how you are evaluating what it is that you are actually like putting in front of the user and what their needs are. Um, so yeah, I am trying. I'm in the pool right now of AI and actually trying to see how to leverage it. And it feels a lot like the previous experiences of like crypto, where there was like such a boon, or uh, sorry, blockchain. Where it's like it's this great opportunity that I think is going to have a paradigm shift in the way that we work, or the way that people produce things. Um, but I still haven't been able to figure out exactly how to leverage it in like the full cycle of how do we do design work.
Yeah, it's AI is it's one of those things where you look at the Twitter threads and or the Blue Sky threads and you're like, people are doing cool stuff, but every time that I've tried to approach it and good faith efforts, I run into like some issue, like hallucinations are too much, or it's not doing exactly the non-deterministic output. I guess it's hard to work with, right?
Yep.
And so it's felt like it's on the verge, like it's on the precipice of being really really helpful, but it's never quite gotten there for.
Yeah, no, I feel similar. I mean, I think as you see more bespoke applications to like specific verticals, like it will get better and better. I think in the testing that I've done, like it's very hard. The more expansive that the feature set is or the functionality is of an app, the less that um, the less that you can have it lead. I think you can have it be assistive, but I don't think you can have it leading. But there's also there's also some challenges around where there's a lot of people that I think get enamored by the fidelity of like how quickly you can produce a thing. And for me, fidelity is oftentimes carries a trapping, because it gives the appearance that we have done more critical thinking, just because something looks like polished and well presented. If you can take that fidelity and go off and start to test it and go have interactions and keep that mindset where this should still be disposable or like uh, highly adaptable still, that's fine. But typically, the more that we put into something, our human biases makes it that it makes it harder and harder for us to crumple it up and throw it away.
That sunk cost is very real. You're just like, I want to keep building on this. I want to go back to what you were talking about with like smell your customers, because I think that's just such a powerful way of framing that mindset. One thing that we've noticed with teams is one of the best collaboration tools we have is not like any specific ritual. It is aligning on the customer journey and like really understanding what makes them tick and doing sort of that level of thinking, that level of research. We've noticed that a lot of teams like to rely on subject matter experts, where they, someone who's friendly to them, who's kind of like sort of kind of lived the experience, but they end up knowing too much about what you're building to be like active, like a good representation of the customer. How do
Yep.
you help teams kind of get out of their office and find customers where they're at and do the discovery that's ultimately needed for that baseline collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simplest time is I bring the customers to them, right? I
Mhm.
think that's this goes back to kind of like the being protective or concern of the ugly baby. Depending on how much kind of like capital or how much you care, you can, if a product's already working, you can go off and do testing, record it, and then come back and show that to people. And so I had a good friend who was interviewing for a company, and one of the things that ultimately had him chosen as the right person for leading product was that he took the product and went off and did usability testing with it, and then presented the insights and had recordings and snippets of it. And I think that's what I've typically found is, like engineers, other people, like they want to, like they want the feedback. It's just been that they haven't been given the chance to receive it. And so a lot of times, uh, it's probably the, like one of my go-tos of, like, if I am ever, well, if I'm ever within an organization where, like the engineering or the product people don't have access to customers, I will just bring them in. I will bring a proxy. Like if I can't even get the ideal customer, I'll get someone else, because again, whether it's usability issues, a lot of those things can be discovered by people who aren't domain experts. But I wouldn't do an engagement with a company if I didn't have access to customers. Like it is that baked in as a principle to me that I don't see how I could do the work that I do without being able to talk with customers. It's like it's oxygen for me.
Yeah, I think it's I think once you've had that kind of what we were talking about before, that pain, that wastefulness, where you've done too much work and you've had to throw it away, and you realize that the antidote to that is talking to customers, and it truly, I think oxygen is such a great way to describe it, because if you're not solving real problems for people, what are we doing with with the product team, right?
Yeah.
And one thing that we do see though is, and we were kind of talking about it before, is like this tension between like velocity and shipping, and you get in this kind of tunnel vision of we got to hit the KPI and we got to ship these big
Yep.
features. Um, at what point do we like? Can it be like a ground up effort where like the designer goes off and finds some customers, brings them in, versus leadership has to come in and kind of say, we need to be thinking about things differently. We need to be making the space for ourselves to go and do these explorations.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that's still a challenge that we face today, right? Which is, again, I said at the top, the goalposts, right? Too often the goalpost is seen as producing the work or the design deliverables to hand off. And I think uh, if you have that definition, then you are just, you're ripe for failure from the onset of it. And so that oftentimes is where we have to then do the coaching to get the organization to understand, what we care about is results, right? Like if we go off and if we, um, the framework that I use now when I think about how I do things on the product side is that, um, if I am, whenever we're turning an idea and turning it into functionality, it's typically we're doing design activities that are either increasing the clarity of what it is that we need to build and deliver, or activities that are going to give us confidence about, are we building the right thing. And so if I can have clarity and if I have confidence, then I'm going to get the results. And the organization should care about making an impact on the user, because a happy user will lead to someone who, pays the company or whatever form of currency, is being exchanged. So, that's kind of sometimes the other way to go about with, mandating at the top, which is like starting to kind of questioning around confidence again, of like what, we're going off and we're going to do this 6 month development to do this new product area for this company. We're willing to spend $1.5 million. How much confidence do you have, and write it from 0 to 100% that this is going to be a guaranteed success to the numbers that we want. Okay, people here, and it's always shocking the number of people that say like 80-90%, because again, I think we typically don't have a culture of admitting that, like, I don't know, and like that can be a fine statement to say, rather than having to posture that it's like, yes, I have, full confidence in this, because anything otherwise would mean I'd get fired. um, and so when we're at that kind of 78% level, then we can start to break down, okay, well, what's the information or what's the evidence that is informing this to be so high, right? And so that's sometimes where I kind of, where my logical brain and try to like decompose something down, to really get down to, again, what assumptions or what information, is informing this.
Yeah, I think that psychological safety of like being able to say I'm 30% confident that that this is going to be a successful effort for us. It's just so important to cultivate. And I'm kind of curious. That leads me to my next thought here is, if you had a magic wand and could kind of like put together the perfect product team and the perfect product org, how does that start shaping together?
That's a great question. I think I'd go back to, again, like cross-functional teams, because I think you do need um, we do need kind of like that leg of the product team of like there needs to be someone who understands how to actually like build and make things and is able to execute on them. So I typically like having like someone who's really strong on the engineering side of things. I like having someone who has that deep intimacy understanding of what does like the customer need. It just depends on the organization, but sometimes if if you're more B2B, that comes from someone who's like in um, customer support or customer success, or even a salesperson. And then I do like having someone who can do the shaping of an idea. And so, how do we go off and start to do that first concepting and sketching of what an idea might be like, um, and then uh, I think it depends on level of maturity of the organization. If you're like very early on and you're still trying to find product market fit, or if you're actually more of an established company and you're trying to figure out how to just continue your engines of growth, having someone who is someone who understands how this piece of the product fits into um, the larger whole. So there's a lot of like part to whole thinking that I think often needs to happen, because if not, we become too myopic on optimizing one thing that ends up having some kind of ripple effect on other areas of the product.
I love that. That sounds like a great team to work on. Love to build that team. Kind of changing gears a little bit. I'm really curious to kind of hear a little bit more about teaching and like working with design students. Is there something that always surprises you about what they do or don't know about like building products, and you're always like, wow, this is something that I either assumed you all knew already, or it has totally changed my perspective on like how to think about design.
Hmm, that's a really good question. I think this is something that I learned later on from like my own design career, but I think it's the necessity to have um, two good options. And so this is one of the principles that I really rely on in my life now, which is I don't. The way that I ask a lot of like the design students is like, how do you know when you've done enough ideation, right? I mean, we go off and in the design process we talk about doing divergent thinking and then figuring out selection criteria and then converging and doing a double diamond, all that stuff. But in its simplest form is like, how do you know when you've actually done enough ideation? And for me, the simple answer has been is when we have two really good options to choose from, because one, in the comparison of those two choices is where we really start to, at least in my personal opinion, where we start to understand what are the decisions that we have to make and what trade-offs are we willing to stomach. Um, and so by having that dialogue between option A and option B, and they need to be starkly different, it can't just be like, small changes between them. I think that's where we start to get, where we make sure like on the higher level order things are in place. And then with having two good options, it also gives you the fallback. If you go off and you choose option A and you start to test it, and it doesn't work out in the way that you were hoping, you're not starting back from zero, right? You already have a plan B, and maybe that will be modified. But the good thing there also is um, one of the hardest things for us to avoid is to not falling in love with one idea or selecting an idea too quickly. And so the longer that you can have those two ideas, and the fact that there are two ideas means that you're trying to stay open to consider and evaluate more things. So that I think is probably one of the practices that I definitely did not employ very early on. But now it really is. I don't feel like I can come to a good decision until I've been able to identify two different options. Um, uh, and I think for students, um, when you're learning something new, oftentimes you are just like you're drowning from the fire hose. There's so many things that are being thrown your way. You have your own set of expectations, or you are comparing yourself to the students around you, or your expectations, and maybe you're focused on the wrong things. And so I think that it's just like it's not one of those things that's obvious, right? Like you just learn that going through, or I learned it through um, making a lot of suboptimal decisions in other products, and then realizing like how much of it was like I was just too quick to fixate on one thing.
I love that. That's such a good answer to something that it feels like a fundamental truth, right? It's like if you
Yeah.
have two good options, you can build from there. And it's I've never heard that as well put as that. So
Well, because I
I
think
think
there's a lot of things where it's like the um, fidelity. Like fidelity is very like sexy and eye catching, and for a lot of people, or even for me as someone who's like, again, pencil challenged, like I really appreciate things that are well designed, and the first taste is always with the eyes. And so when we see things that look well designed or have pretty typography or good balance or good hierarchy, there is a certain confidence that we already start to project onto them. And so for a lot of times, and this happens with stakeholders, right? It's like the visual aesthetics are very easy for us to judge and start to evaluate, but it's a facade. And so I think a lot of people early on in their design career gravitate too much towards the UI, like the visual appearance of things, without understanding, and we can talk about this more, the power of ugly, right? How it's actually like how having something separating the form from the function, the functionality is king for like the long term usage of that product.
yeah, it's so funny. When we put designs like mock-ups in front of stakeholders, oftentimes we'll get oh, it looks great. We love it.
Yeah.
This is doing exactly what we're looking for. And then we code it up and we put it in their hands where they can use it. And we get so much more feedback. And we're always like, wait, you saw this. It looks the same. Why couldn't you articulate that earlier? And there's just something to like, getting your hands on it and feeling the interaction and the experience as opposed to just seeing it visually and trying to process it abstractly. Um, and so we've gotten a lot more into like prototype. Let's just get this
Yeah.
in someone's hands so you can feel it and play with it and experience it, not just see it. With when you're working with students, one challenge that I've always ran into was like pushing for iteration and like encouraging them to take that, do another screen or do another
Yeah.
thought. How does like kind of this intersection of prototyping and iteration combine? Like, how do you kind of impart that wisdom to them to keep pushing?
It's a good question. I think what I was thinking about for part of it is like it's just an expectation. Like I even when I make my syllabus, there's like version 2, version 3, version 4 of like if we're doing functionality or feature, and it's a simple cue, which is like, hey, we expect that the first version that we get out is not going to be the best, and so um, we have to leave room for iteration. Similarly with clients, sometimes the design process feels too magical, and you and I as designers know like the middle is really messy. It's not always kind of like a linear process, and so I'm always curious, I'm always conscious of not just saying I'm going to go off and we're going to make designs and then we're going to do testing and then it's magic. It's like, no, we're going to go do designs, we're going to go do testing, and then we are going to go do iterations based on the feedback. And that connectivity between we test a thing and then we need to actually go off and bring that back to the team, and from that tweak or overhaul the things that we have. That to me is a big piece of the work that needs to be made visible, so that there aren't any surprises, that process is expected for us to follow.
But I love that idea of visibility because I think that comes back to collaboration, right? Like when you don't have visibility into what your developers are doing, it's hard to build that empathy. And
Yep.
PM, the developer or designer, you kind of swap the hat around. Do you have any best practices or things that you like to do to promote that visibility within the team?
Yeah, I think, I mean, when I there has to be like the definition of process, right? And so when I work with teams or when I work with students, I mean, part of it is like um, is the meta conversation, is like we talk about how we do design, and then I also expect, or how we do software development, and then in my ideal cycle is that there is always a retrospective at the end of a sprint or cycle, whatever term you want to have, which is focused on us. How do we ensure that we are better tomorrow than we were today? And so making space for having conversation about the way that we work and the way that we operate is one of like the simplest things that you can do to ensure that a team continues to evolve regardless of whether it's like the product changes, someone gets hired, we focus on a different vertical. It's literally like the one of the easier things that you can do, which is just to make sure that you are um, testing out and talking about the things that worked well, the things that didn't go well, and the opportunities to try new things to solve um, how to keep the team like functioning at a high level. One of the things that's fantastic is, like you said, is there's limitations to what you can convey or what you can feel or experience from a prototype. Prototype to me is a very limiting word because a lot of prototypes are often it's like, oh well, here's a screenshot, or here's like the three key screens, but there's no interaction between them. We don't get a sense of how it feels to have the information transform or how it goes from jumping from one page to another. And so that's the benefit of the walking skeleton. Like I can start to click on things, I can start to input things. And more importantly, I am getting a sense of what is the easiest and lowest cost version that we could stand up of this. And it's reflective of like the design system that's in place or like the framework that's in place for like the front end UI, all that stuff. Because a lot of times I'm not concerned with like the pixels and like how many, what's the radius of a button corner. All of those things are really just like cosmetic and lipstick. So having the developer go off and make something that we can actually start to interact with and also shows kind of what is easy from the code base, while then doing the design track, which is not concerned so much with the actual like development limitations sometimes, and it can still be a little bigger picture because I know we can explore that in a way where we're not constrained by technology. And then when we get together, we will have that conversation and start to figure out how to reconcile the two together.
I love that. It almost reminds me of like you could have like if you're writing a movie, right, and you have a script, and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of tells you how everything's working versus like the concept art of like this is
Yeah.
how we could visualize it. You need both, right?
Even you can even go further because this concept does exist. So in a lot of animated films, I think they're called previs, and so
Mhm.
they will take something that would look like more akin to the black and white sketches, like drawings, and they will let's say there's going to be 28 frames in a second. They'll make it at 4 frames a second, and they'll give you 30 seconds, and we're going to say, hey, this is the really emotional scene where the robot kisses the octopus, right? We know this is supposed to be like one of like the most important scenes. Well, they can do that previs, and you can get a taste for what it's like to be a 30-second clip instead of just being static storyboard sketches, right?
Mhm.
And again, there's a more as you get closer to it being the final product, you can do a better job of evaluating it.
Right, right, right. It's funny. There's such pressure, and we've kind of this been a theme. I feel like throughout our conversation, such pressure to get to the end, right, and to like have that final high fidelity thing. And it's like if only we could all just take the time to think through the experience and to explore and to do the work that's required to like really understand it. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's where great product happens. It's
Yeah.
not running to the end as fast as you can. Good, like you can accidentally sometimes get there. I think that happens, but it's like this. There's that conveyor belt mentality versus the experiment. We're going to figure this out sort of mentality that I think teams really struggle with.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the conveyor belt, and again, this is a larger rant, but this is where I think like the whole concept between like behind velocity and agile is really focused on an optimization of a production model
Mhm.
versus actually framing it to be more human oriented around, which is like we build products to help people improve their lives, right? So how do we define what that is, and how do we actually make sure that the goalpost isn't just like we've pushed this release out into production? How do we actually ensure that like no, we've observed that like users use this functionality and it was effective and it was actually as simple to do because again, if we go back to kind of like the design cycle or like a software cycle, um, when we are doing something new, that is when there is the most potential for things that we could not consider. And so, in the same way that I will budget iterations after doing testing, I always do a fast follow, which is when I know we're doing something that we don't have a lot of experience, or even if we haven't been able to do the amount of testing that I would prefer, I will budget time in the next sprint to go off and to continue to improve or tweak a thing, because ultimately, like, what I care about is I want to build something that helps someone, right? I'm less concerned with tracking the story points and all that stuff. That's process, right? But I really like, I generally want to build products that help improve people's lives, and so that's like the measurement. That's where it matters to me.
Mhm. Absolutely. I wish everybody in product had that same motivation because it's
I don't think it's just product, right? It's just like
well,
the
the world
yeah, the
today.
operation of like stakeholders and businesses and
Mhm.
what do we expect. But it's, yeah, it's typically, it's like, if you have happy customers, they will pay you and they will reward you, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're coming up on time here, and I do want to save some space. Is there something that you want everyone tuning in to go check out that we should go take a look at?
You're gonna have to cut it because I don't think they're. No, I mean, I wish we had like 3 hours, because I think we started getting a lot more onto the product side of things and not on like the technical fluency.
Well, I could talk about this forever with you, as you well know, but it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been incredible.